For all these functions, L refers to a list, and there are k items in that list. The question is, how many iterations are there in each function? Function number 1 has a for loop that looks at each value in L once. This function will have as many iterations as there are items in the list L, which is k items, therefore k iterations. Function number 2 has a for loop that goes in the range of the length of the list. We know this means all the numbers from 0 to the length of the list minus 1. These are the usable indices in the list L. But actually, this loop does the exact same thing. It looks at every element in the list exactly once. Therefore, the answer is the same. This function, like the one before, will have k iterations. In fact, function 1 and function 2 are equivalent in what they do. It's just that one loops over the elements in the list and the other loops over the indices in the list and gets the elements after. Function number 3 actually does the exact same thing as well. It uses a while loop to go over all the indices in the list, starting at 0, adding 1 every time, and going all the way to the length of the list minus 1. This while loop will have k iterations as well. Function number 4 looks similar with one crucial difference. Here I is incremented by 2 instead of 1. While the previous function increased I by 1, therefore looking at the next element for every while loop, this function increases I by 2, meaning that every time it runs, it skips an index. It skips an element and only looks at half of the elements in the list. So the number of iterations for this while loop will be k over 2. Function number 5 comes with a precondition. The length of the list has to be strictly divisible by 4. Then, in the line in the while loop that determines the step, how far the index is going to advance, it increases the index by a quarter of the length of the list. So, in a list of length 20, the first time the while loop runs, I will be 0. Then it will be 5. Then it will be 10. Then it will be 15. That's 4 iterations. On the 5th iteration, it'll try to be 20, but that will fail the condition for the while loop, because 20 is the length of the list and not less than the length of the list. And so this while loop will have 4 iterations. It turns out this loop will advance forward a quarter of the list every time, regardless of how long the list is, meaning that it will always reliably have exactly 4 iterations. Now, let's look at the runtime for each of these functions. So if the length of the list is doubled here, the number of iterations will also double. This is a linear runtime function. Number 2, if the length of the list is doubled, instead of k iterations, we'll have 2k iterations, which will double the number of iterations. This is also a linear runtime function. Number 3, k iterations, you double the length of the list, you double the number of iterations, that's a linear runtime. Number 4, I make half as many iterations as there are items in the list. But if I double the number of items in the list, if I suddenly have 2k items, I'm going to make k iterations, which is twice as many iterations than I did before. This makes this function also a linear runtime function, even though it has fewer iterations than the one before. Number 5 has 4 iterations, and if I double the length of the list, the number of iterations doesn't change. This makes it a constant runtime function.